Some people survive because they are strong. Others survive because a stranger arrives before hope disappears. The desert had a cruel way of deciding who deserved another sunrise. Ayanna Red Hawk hung suspended above a jagged canyon, every breath stealing another fragment of the strength she had left. The coarse hemp rope bit into her wrists until warm blood slid down her fingers, disappearing into the endless gulf beneath her boots. Loose stones tumbled from the cliff face, vanishing into darkness before the faint echoes drifted back upward. She never heard them strike the bottom. The afternoon sun burned without mercy. Heat shimmered across the red sandstone like invisible fire, turning every distant ridge into a wavering illusion. Sweat mixed with dust on her face, stinging her eyes until the world blurred into shades of copper and gold. She had already stopped calling for help. No traveler crossed this forgotten stretch of Arizona territory. Hunters avoided it. Traders circled around it. Even coyotes kept their distance once darkness settled over the canyon. That was exactly why someone had chosen this place. Ayanna lowered her head, breathing carefully against the pain spreading through her shoulders. Whoever had built the trap hadn't wanted a quick death. They had wanted silence. Hours of waiting. Hours of watching the sun drift across the sky while knowing nobody would come. The rope groaned. One thick strand snapped with a dry crack. Her heart stumbled. She closed her eyes. So this was how it ended. Not in battle beside her people. Not protecting her homeland. Not with dignity worthy of her ancestors. But alone. Forgotten. Swinging above an empty canyon where only vultures would remember her name. The wind carried the scent of dry sage and distant rain that would never reach this valley. Somewhere high above, a hawk circled lazily against the brilliant blue sky, as if patiently waiting for nature to finish its work. Another strand broke. The rope twisted sharply. Ayanna gritted her teeth as agony shot through both shoulders. She whispered a quiet Apache prayer her grandmother had taught her as a little girl. Not a prayer asking to live. A prayer asking for courage when death arrived. Then, something unexpected interrupted the silence. A sound too rhythmic to belong to the wind. Hoofbeats. Faint at first. Slow. Steady. Impossible. She opened her eyes. Across the canyon rim, beyond the dancing haze of heat, a lone rider emerged between towering rocks. His horse was dark as storm clouds, its mane tossing in the dry wind while dust curled beneath every powerful stride. The rider reined in without hurry. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for his rifle. He simply looked. Even from this distance, Ayanna felt his gaze measuring the cliff, the broken rope, the scattered stones, every detail speaking louder than words. The cowboy slid from the saddle with practiced calm. Tall, broad-shouldered. His weathered hat hid most of his face, but nothing concealed the quiet confidence in the way he moved. Every motion was deliberate, like a ranch hand who had spent years solving problems no one else wanted. He knelt beside the cliff's edge and studied the anchor holding the rope. His jaw tightened. This wasn't an accident, he muttered to himself. The words drifted downward with the wind. Ayanna stared upward, unable to answer. She had never seen the man before, yet for the first time since sunrise. She no longer believed the canyon would become her grave. What neither of them knew was that hidden among the rocks above, another pair of eyes had already spotted the cowboy and quietly rested a finger on the trigger of a rifle. The strongest men are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones willing to hang over the edge with someone else's life in their hands. Elias Walker removed his gloves one finger at a time. The leather dropped silently onto the sandstone beside him. He crouched at the canyon's edge, studying the frayed rope disappearing into the abyss. Years of mending fences and pulling stubborn cattle from ravines had taught him something simple. Rope always told the truth. This one had not worn out. It had been cut. Not completely. Just enough. A few careful slices hidden beneath the fibers, waiting for weight and time to finish the job. Elias lifted his eyes toward the endless desert. No fresh wagon. Tracks. No abandoned campfire. Whoever had done this knew exactly how to vanish. Another sharp crack echoed below. The woman slipped several inches. Dust showered into the canyon. Without wasting another second, Elias untied the long lariat coiled around his saddle horn. His black stallion shifted uneasily, sensing danger before any man could. "Easy, Ranger," Elias murmured, resting one rough hand against the horse's neck. "You're holding both of us today." The stallion answered with a low breath, but remained perfectly still. Elias looped one end of the lariat around a thick stone pillar rooted deep in the cliff. He pulled twice, then a third time. Satisfied, he wrapped the remaining rope around his waist. No hesitation, no prayer, only quiet determination. He stepped backward over the edge. Gravity seized him instantly. Boots scraped against rough sandstone as loose gravel cascaded into the darkness below. Every movement sent tiny avalanches rolling beneath his heels. The canyon walls radiated the day's trapped heat, carrying the smell of hot rock, dry earth, and centuries of untouched silence. 20 feet, 30, 40. Finally, he saw her clearly. The Apache woman looked younger than he had expected. Her long black hair clung to her face with sweat. Dust covered the embroidered leather dress she wore beneath a torn buckskin shawl. Blood stained both wrists where the rope had carved through her skin. Yet her eyes remained sharp, defiant. She studied him the way wounded wolves watched approaching hunters. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Her voice was barely stronger than the wind. Elias gave the faintest smile. "Funny." He kept lowering himself. "I was about to tell you the same thing." For the first time since he had arrived, something flickered across her exhausted face. Not trust, confusion. Most white men she had met looked at Apache people with suspicion. This stranger looked only at the broken rope. "You can still climb back," she said quietly. "They're watching." Elias paused. "They?" She closed her eyes for only a heartbeat. "They'll kill you." The warning sounded honest. Not desperate. Not manipulative. Simply certain. Elias slowly turned his head. The canyon stretched in every direction. Towering cliffs. Red stone. Shadows. Nothing moved. Nothing. Except one brief flash. Sunlight glinted against polished metal high on the western ridge. A rifle scope. Barely visible. Gone before another man might have noticed. Elias said nothing. Instead, he reached the woman. The rope holding her wrists had nearly separated. One more minute. Perhaps less. He drew a small hunting knife from his boot. Ayanna stiffened immediately. Every muscle in her body tensed. "If you cut the wrong rope," she breathed. "We both die." "I know." His answer was calm enough to silence the fear growing between them. He slipped one arm around the narrow ledge behind her, pressing his shoulder against the canyon wall while carefully shifting her weight onto his own body. Stone scraped against leather. The cliff groaned beneath them. For one terrifying second, neither of them was supported by solid ground. Only Elias's rope. Only his balance. Only his strength. His knife sliced through the damaged binding. The old rope snapped apart instantly. Ayanna fell forward. Straight into him. The sudden weight jerked both of them violently away from the cliff. The lariat stretched until every fiber screamed under impossible tension. Above them, Ranger dug all four hooves into the sandstone, muscles trembling as the powerful horse refused to yield even an inch. For a breathless moment, man, woman, and horse hung suspended between life and death. Then the first rifle shot shattered the silence. The first bullet rarely tells you who your enemy is. It only tells you that someone has already chosen your death. The rifle cracked across the canyon like summer lightning. A splinter of sandstone exploded inches from Elias Walker's shoulder, showering both him and Ayanna with sharp fragments of red rock. "Hold on." He tightened one arm around her waist just as the lariat lurched violently above them. Ranger braced harder, his muscles trembling against the impossible strain. The stallion's hooves scraped across the cliff edge, carving deep grooves into the stone, but refusing to surrender another inch. A second shot echoed. This one struck the canyon wall beneath them. Stone burst into dust. Tiny rocks rained into the abyss. "They're trying to cut the rope," Ayanna whispered. There was no panic in her voice, only certainty. Elias looked upward. The sniper had already disappeared behind the ridge. Professional, patient. Whoever waited above understood distance, angles, and fear. Elias wasted no time searching for shadows. "Wrap your arms around my neck." She hesitated, not because she doubted his strength, because she had spent her entire life being taught never to place her life completely in the hands of a stranger, especially not a white one. Another rifle shot screamed overhead. The bullet struck the stone anchor holding the rope. Dust drifted into the blazing afternoon air. Trust became the only choice left. Ayanna slowly wrapped both aching arms around Elias. He felt how badly she trembled. Not from fear. From exhaustion. You've lost too much blood, he muttered. I've survived worse. I believe you. Without another word, Elias climbed. Every pull burned through his shoulders. Every foothold crumbled beneath his boots. The canyon seemed determined to drag them both downward. Heat radiated from the sandstone until breathing itself became labor. Sweat soaked through Elias's shirt while dust coated his face like dried clay. His fingers bled where the rope bit into his palms, but he never loosened his grip. Above them, Ranger gave one powerful pull, then another. The horse leaned backward with every ounce of strength bred into generations of ranch stock. Little by little, the canyon surrendered them. When Elias finally rolled onto solid ground, he lay flat on his back, breathing hard against the cloudless sky. Beside him, Ayana remained silent, staring upward as if she could not believe the blue heavens still belonged to the living. Ranger walked over immediately. The great black horse lowered his head, gently nudging Elias's shoulder before sniffing Ayana's injured wrists. A faint smile appeared on her face. He trusts me already. He trusts everyone, Elias answered, catching his breath. That's why I spend half my life keeping him out of trouble. For the first time, she almost laughed. Almost. The moment lasted only a heartbeat. Then Elias noticed something half buried beneath the loose gravel where she had fallen. A small leather pouch, no larger than a man's hand. It had slipped from beneath her torn buckskin shawl during the climb. She saw it too. Every trace of warmth vanished from her expression. No. She lunged forward despite the pain, grabbing the pouch before Elias could reach it. Her movements were far too desperate for an ordinary keepsake. She held it tightly against her chest. You didn't see this. I wasn't looking. You must forget it exists. Elias studied her face. The fear there had nothing to do with the sniper. It was fear of what lay inside that weathered leather pouch. He nodded once. If that's what you want. She searched his eyes, almost expecting another lie. Instead, she found only quiet restraint. Few men turned away from secrets. This cowboy had. Far below, silence settled over the canyon once again. Too much silence. Elias slowly stood, brushing dust from his clothes. They've stopped shooting. Ayana's face grew pale. That's worse. Why? Because now. She looked toward the western ridge where the unseen riflemen had vanished. They're no longer trying to kill us from far away. A faint breeze carried something across the desert. Not gunfire. Not voices. The unmistakable rhythm of several horses galloping together. Closing fast. Sometimes the desert is kind enough to warn you before death arrives. It sends dust across the horizon long before it sends the men. The sound grew louder. Not one horse. Not two. Several. Riding hard. Elias climbed onto a broad slab of sandstone and narrowed his eyes toward the western flats. A long ribbon of dust rolled across the desert beneath the blazing afternoon sun. Whoever approached knew exactly where they were going. There was no searching. No hesitation. They found us, Ayana said quietly. She had already tucked the leather pouch beneath her buckskin dress. One hand never drifted far from it, as though touching it reminded her why she still had to keep breathing. Elias counted the riders. 5. Ayana listened, then slowly shook her head. No. He looked at her. She closed her eyes, hearing what years in the mountains had taught her to recognize. 7. A few moments later, 2 more clouds of dust appeared behind the first. Elias smiled faintly. I hate being wrong. You'll hate what's coming more. There wasn't enough time to argue. He untied the Winchester from Ranger's saddle and checked the chamber with practiced hands. The rifle was clean, oiled, reliable. Then he looked at Ayana. You know how to shoot? She answered by pulling a small revolver from beneath her torn shawl. Only 2 cartridges remained. I know how to make both count. A flicker of respect crossed Elias's face. The riders appeared over the nearest ridge. 7 men. No uniforms. No badges. Dust-covered hats hid their faces, but every saddle carried a rifle, and every horse wore expensive tack that ordinary ranch hands could never afford. Mercenaries. The man riding in front wore a faded gray duster despite the suffocating heat. A long scar crossed one side of his jaw, disappearing beneath a thick beard. He raised one gloved hand. The other stopped immediately. Disciplined. Not outlaws driven by anger. Men paid to finish work. The leader's voice carried easily across the open stone. Walk away, cowboy. Elias didn't answer. We're not here for you. Still nothing. The stranger sighed. You've got 10 seconds to make the smartest decision of your life. Ranger snorted beside Elias, stamping one hoof against the rock. The cowboy gently rested a hand on the stallion's neck. I've never been much good at counting. The scarred man chuckled. Pity. His smile disappeared. Take the woman. 6 riders exploded forward at once. The canyon erupted beneath pounding hooves. Dust billowed into the air while echoes bounced from every cliff. Elias fired first. The Winchester roared. The lead rider's hat spun away as the bullet shattered the rifle in his hands instead of striking the man himself. The mercenary cursed, jerking his frightened horse sideways. Ayanna looked at Elias in disbelief. You missed. I didn't. She finally understood. He had aimed for the weapon, not the rider. The remaining men spread apart immediately, circling like wolves testing a wounded buffalo. They're trained, Elias muttered. So are you. I fix fences. You don't move like a man who only fixes fences. Before Elias could answer, the scarred leader called out again. His voice remained calm, almost friendly. You don't even know what she's carrying. Silence. Ask her. Elias glanced toward Ayanna. She stared at the ground. You deserve the truth, the leader continued. That little pouch she's hiding contains a map. The desert suddenly felt very quiet. A map to what? Elias asked. The stranger smiled beneath his beard. Water. No one spoke. The leader slowly removed his hat, revealing cold gray eyes that never left Ayanna. Not just any spring. He pointed toward the endless red mesas beyond the horizon. The last untouched water source in 300 miles. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elias looked toward Ayanna. She never denied it. Instead, she whispered words so softly they barely escaped her lips. If they find it. Her fingers tightened around the hidden pouch. They won't just destroy my people. She lifted her eyes to his. They'll own every family that needs a drink to survive. The richest men in the West never searched for gold. They searched for the place where every thirsty soul would eventually come begging. The mercenaries spread wider across the desert. They did not rush. Men who hunted for money rarely wasted bullets when patience worked just as well. The scarred leader rested both hands on his saddle horn. You've got nowhere to ride. Elias glanced toward the open valley behind them. The man was right. 7 riders could outrun 2 exhausted people before sunset. The canyon had become a trap twice in one day. Only this time, the walls were made of open desert. Ayanna stepped closer. If you stay with me, she said quietly, they'll kill you. They've already tried. I mean eventually. Elias looked at the fading sun. Long shadows stretched across the sandstone, turning familiar rocks into dark shapes that could hide anything. My father used to tell me something. She waited. He said a man spends his whole life deciding what kind of stranger he'll be. She frowned. I never understood him. I think I just did. Without another word, Elias grabbed Ranger's reins and swung into the saddle. He reached down. Ayanna hesitated only a heartbeat before taking his hand. He pulled her up behind him. The black stallion leaped forward. Gunfire exploded behind them. Bullets snapped through dry brush and shattered stones along the narrow trail. Ranger stretched into a full gallop, muscles rolling beneath his glossy coat, while dust erupted beneath pounding hooves. The desert blurred into streaks of crimson earth and towering cactus. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were wind, breathing, and death refusing to fall behind. Nearly an hour passed before Elias finally slowed beneath a maze of towering red mesas where twisting stone passages hid them from the open plain. Ranger lowered his head gratefully, drawing long breaths. Ayanna slid carefully from the saddle. Her legs nearly gave way. Elias caught her elbow before she collapsed. You need water. So do you. He removed a weathered canteen from his saddle. Only a few swallows remained. He handed it to her first. She stared at it. Drink. You first. He smiled. You were hanging from a cliff. So were you. For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, Elias uncorked the canteen and took the smallest sip imaginable. Then he handed it back. Ayanna drank just enough to wet her lips before sealing it again. She returned it without another word. Neither of them had taken what they truly wanted, for reasons neither fully understood. That mattered. As twilight settled over the desert, they sheltered beneath a narrow stone overhang where cool air drifted through ancient cracks in the rock. Elias gathered dry sage and mesquite branches. A tiny fire flickered to life. Orange light danced across the canyon walls, throwing long shadows over their tired faces. For the first time since they met, silence felt peaceful instead of dangerous, only protecting it until the right time. The map. She nodded. It doesn't lead to treasure. It leads to life. The flames crackled softly. She opened the pouch just enough for Elias to glimpse an old piece of folded deerskin covered with faded ink and symbols unlike any map he had ever seen. Then she closed it again. If they reach that spring, she whispered, every ranch, every farm, every Apache camp, every traveler crossing this territory will have to buy water from men who believe mercy has a price. Elias stared into the fire for a long time. Then he quietly reached for the burning mesquite branch and used it to erase every hoofprint leading into the narrow pass. Ayanna watched him. You've made your choice. He stood, looking toward the darkening horizon where coyotes had begun to howl. No. His voice was calm. I've only decided that nobody gets to own a drink of water while I'm still breathing. Neither of them noticed the faint glow of another campfire flickering less than a mile away, or the Apache scout watching their fire from the darkness above. The desert remembers every footprint. But people remember something far more dangerous, old hatred. The coyotes fell silent. That was the first warning. Ranger raised his head from the small patch of dry grass and gave a low, uneasy snort. His ears turned toward the cliffs above, following sounds too soft for ordinary ears. Ayanna stood at once. They're here. Elias reached for the Winchester. The mercenaries? She slowly shook her head. No. Her expression tightened. My people. The words had barely left her lips when shadows appeared along the ridge. 1, then 3, then 6. Silent figures emerged from the darkness as though the rocks themselves had come alive. Moonlight reflected faintly from bows, rifles, and polished spearheads. Faces painted in muted earth colors watched without a word. Within seconds, more warriors surrounded the narrow pass. No shouting, no threats, only complete control. Elias counted nearly 20 before he stopped trying. There were probably twice that many hidden beyond the rocks. An older warrior stepped forward. His silver-streaked hair was tied neatly behind his shoulders. Deep lines marked a lifetime beneath the desert sun, yet his movements remained steady and proud. A long Spencer carbine rested comfortably in one hand. His dark eyes settled first on Ayanna, then on Elias. Finally, on the leather pouch beneath Ayanna's buckskin dress. He spoke quietly in Apache. Ayanna answered immediately. Their exchange was calm at first, then sharper. The older warrior's face hardened. He pointed directly at Elias. Ayanna stepped between them. Another exchange followed. Longer, more urgent. Elias understood none of the words. He understood the looks. Half the warriors stared at him with suspicion. The other half watched him the way hunters watched a wounded mountain lion. Not with hatred, with caution. The old warrior spoke one final sentence. Ayanna lowered her eyes. She turned slowly toward Elias. They want you to surrender your rifle. Elias looked around the narrow pass. 20 rifles already pointed toward him. Keeping one more would change nothing. He opened the Winchester, removed every cartridge, placed both ammunition and rifle carefully upon the ground, then stepped back. The old warrior nodded once. Respect, not gratitude. One young warrior hurried forward to collect the weapon. As he reached for it, his eyes narrowed. He froze. The rifle's wooden stock carried fresh marks where bullets had struck earlier that day. He looked at Elias, then at the scarred scratches along Elias's bleeding hands. Whispers moved quietly among the Apache warriors. One of them noticed Ranger. The black stallion stood perfectly still despite being surrounded by strangers. Another warrior examined the deep rope burns circling Elias's palms. More whispers. The older warrior watched everything without speaking. Finally, he addressed Ayanna again. She answered softly. His expression changed. Only slightly. What did you tell him? Elias asked. The truth. And he doesn't know whether to believe it. Without interruption, when the messenger finished, silence settled over the gathering. The elder looked directly at Ayanna, then slowly toward Elias. She felt the blood leave her face. They found the bodies. What bodies? The mercenaries. Elias frowned. We left every one of them alive. I know. She stared toward the darkness beyond the canyon. Someone killed them after we escaped. A cold wind drifted through the narrow pass. The old warrior raised one weathered hand. Immediately, every rifle in the camp swung upward. Not toward the cliffs. Not toward the trail. Toward Elias. Ayanna stepped in front of him without thinking. "You cannot believe he did this." The elder answered with quiet sorrow rather than anger. "I do not know what to believe." His gaze remained fixed on Elias. "But wherever this cowboy walks." He paused. "Death seems to arrive before the truth does. The truth does not always arrive with a shout. Sometimes it walks into the firelight carrying something everyone thought had been lost forever." No one slept that night. The Apache camp remained silent beneath a sky crowded with stars. Fires burned low. Horses stood tied among the cottonwoods beside the narrow creek, their occasional snorts becoming the only sound breaking the stillness. Elias sat alone with his hands unbound, but never unwatched. Two warriors stood nearby. Neither spoke. Neither blinked for very long. Across the camp, Ayanna argued quietly with the tribal elder inside a large hide lodge. Their voices rose and fell with restrained emotion before fading into silence once more. Nearly an hour later, the elder stepped outside. He carried an old wooden box. Its surface was cracked with age, wrapped in faded buckskin that had darkened from decades of careful hands. The entire camp watched. The elder knelt before the box as though greeting an old friend. He untied the worn leather straps. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside rested a single silver badge. Time had blackened its edges, but the engraved star still caught the firelight. Beside it lay a folded letter sealed with brittle wax. The elder held up the badge. He looked directly at Elias. "In your family?" he asked quietly in careful English. "Was there once a lawman?" Elias frowned. "My grandfather." The answer surprised even him. "I never knew him." The elder nodded as though expecting exactly those words. "He came here many winters ago." The camp fell completely still. "He arrived wearing that badge." The old man gently turned it over. On the back, nearly hidden beneath years of wear, were 3 engraved initials. J.W. Elias slowly stood. His breathing stopped. Jonathan Walker. The name escaped his lips before he realized he had spoken. "My father told me that was his name." The elder closed his eyes for a moment. "He saved my wife." Ayanna looked from one man to the other. The elder unfolded the old letter with hands that trembled from age rather than fear. "It says he refused money. It says he refused land. It says one life cannot repay another." The old man's voice softened. But before he rode away, he looked toward Elias. "He said his family would always have friends among ours." Silence settled over the camp. Long, heavy, unbroken. The younger warriors stared at Elias with entirely different eyes. Not as a prisoner. Not yet as a friend. As someone whose story had suddenly become tangled with their own. The elder stepped closer. "You saved Ayanna." Elias nodded once. "I only did what anyone should." A faint smile crossed the old man's weathered face. "My grandfather said those exact words." He placed the silver badge into Elias's hands. "It has waited almost 40 years. Elias looked down at the tarnished metal. The edges were worn smooth by countless fingers. Someone had preserved it all this time. Not as treasure, as a promise. Before anyone could speak again, a young Apache scout burst into the circle, breathing hard after a full gallop. His horse stood trembling nearby. He spoke rapidly in Apache. This time there was no confusion on the elder's face. Only grief. He turned toward Ayanna, then toward Elias. "The man who hired the mercenaries," he said quietly, "is not a stranger." Ayanna's eyes widened. "No." The elder nodded once. "He is one of our own." A murmur swept through the camp like a sudden wind. "He disappeared before sunset." The scout added another sentence. The elder's expression hardened. "He has taken 20 warriors loyal only to him." Ayanna's hand instinctively clutched the leather pouch beneath her buckskin dress. "He knows where we're going." The elder slowly looked toward the eastern mountains where the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon. "No." His voice carried the weight of certainty. "He knows where the spring is." For the first time since this journey began, Elias understood the real enemy had never been divided by skin, language, or blood. It had always been divided by one simple choice. Whether a man believed water was a gift, or something that could be sold. Justice is at its strongest when no one reaches for revenge. They rode before sunrise. The eastern sky glowed pale silver as Elias, Ayanna, the tribal elder, and 12 Apache riders crossed the sleeping desert. Hoofbeats echoed softly across the stone mesas, swallowed almost immediately by the endless land. No one spoke. Every rider understood what waited ahead. The hidden spring lay beyond a narrow canyon, where towering cliffs formed a natural gate. Cottonwood trees rose unexpectedly from the dry earth, their green leaves trembling above a ribbon of clear water that had flowed quietly for centuries. It was beautiful, it was sacred, and it was already occupied. The renegade warriors stood scattered among the rocks with rifles in their hands. At their center stood a broad-shouldered Apache man with silver woven into his braids. His name was Tazan Grey Wolf. Once respected, now feared. He smiled as the riders approached. You came too late. Behind him stood nearly 20 armed followers. Beyond them, several frightened settlers knelt with their hands tied. Women, children, an elderly rancher. Travelers who had simply wandered too close to the spring. Elias frowned. You took prisoners. I took customers. Grey Wolf's smile widened. Tomorrow they'll pay. He gestured toward the spring. And so will everyone else. Silence answered him. The elders slowly rode forward until only a few yards separated the two men. You shame our ancestors. Grey Wolf laughed. Our ancestors died poor. I refuse to. He raised his rifle. So choose. Walk away, or watch every thirsty soul in this territory pay tribute. The younger warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. The desert itself seemed to stop breathing. Elias quietly swung down from Ranger. Without raising his rifle, without reaching for his revolver, he simply walked, straight toward Grey Wolf. Gasps spread through both groups. One renegade lifted his rifle. Grey Wolf stopped him with one hand. Curious, Elias continued until only a few feet remained between them. Then, he slowly removed the leather pouch from inside his coat. Iona stared in disbelief. When, he answered without looking back. You dropped it while mounting this morning. Grey Wolf's eyes burned with triumph. So, he reached forward. You finally understand. Elias nodded. I do. He looked down at the weathered pouch. Then beyond it, toward the spring, toward the frightened families, toward the children whose cracked lips spoke of days without enough water. He understood something else. Very slowly, he tossed the pouch. Every eye followed it. Grey Wolf caught it with both hands. His smile grew wider, then instantly disappeared. The pouch felt too light. He ripped it open. Empty. Nothing inside. Not a map. Not a single piece of parchment. His face turned white with rage. Where is it? Elias calmly looked toward Iona. She stepped forward carrying a small bundle wrapped in buckskin. Without saying a word, she walked to the edge of the spring. The elder watched silently. So did every warrior. She unfolded the bundle. Inside rested the ancient deerskin map. For a long moment, she simply looked at it. Then she lowered it into the crystal-clear water. The old ink dissolved. The markings disappeared. Generations of secrets drifted away beneath the current. Grey Wolf screamed. You fool. He lunged forward. 3 of his own followers grabbed him before he reached the water. Not because Elias had stopped him. Not because the elder had ordered them. Because they finally understood. Without the map, no single man could ever claim ownership. The spring belonged to the land again. One by one, the renegade warriors lowered their rifles. One tossed his weapon onto the ground. Then another. Then another. No battle followed. No final gunfight. Only the quiet collapse of greed before people who had remembered something greater than profit. Grey Wolf stood alone, surrounded not by enemies, but by the consequences of his own choices. The elder stepped beside him. He did not raise a weapon. He simply said, You were never defeated by us. He looked toward the flowing spring. You were defeated the moment you believed life itself could be owned. The West rarely remembers the names of good people. It remembers the quiet things they leave behind. A year passed. The desert looked the same to travelers crossing it. The same endless mesas. The same lonely cottonwoods. The same wind carrying dust across forgotten trails. But beneath the silence, everything had changed. The hidden spring no longer belonged to a single tribe, a wealthy rancher, or a greedy merchant. No fences surrounded it. No guards demanded payment. Travelers, settlers, Apache families, and wandering cowboys all stopped there when the journey became too long and the canteens too light. No sign marked the place. None was needed. People simply called it Mercy Spring. Few remembered why. Fewer still knew the names of those who had protected it. Nearly 80 miles away, Elias Walker returned to the ordinary rhythm of ranch life. Broken fences still needed mending. Calves still wandered farther than they should. The roof of the old barn still leaked whenever the rare desert rain arrived. His hands healed. The scars across his palms remained. Sometimes, while repairing a saddle or brushing Ranger beneath the evening sun, he would glance toward the eastern horizon. Not because he expected anyone, only because memories often traveled farther than people did. He never spoke about the Apache camp. He never mentioned Jonathan Walker's silver badge, which now rested quietly inside the small wooden drawer beside his bed. Some stories belong to the heart more than the tongue. Late one autumn afternoon, Elias returned from checking cattle along the northern pasture. Smoke curled gently from the ranch chimney. The air smelled of dry grass and distant rain. Everything appeared exactly as he had left it, until Ranger suddenly stopped walking. The stallion lifted his head. One soft snort escaped his nostrils. Elias followed the horse's gaze. Someone had left another horse beside the front gate. A beautiful chestnut mare stood patiently beneath the old cottonwood tree. No rider waited nearby. No tracks led away. Only the horse. Across its saddle rested a folded buffalo blanket. Elias approached slowly. The mare never moved. She simply watched him with calm, intelligent eyes. Tucked beneath the blanket lay a finely crafted leather bridle unlike anything sold in frontier towns. Every stitch had been sewn by hand. Turquoise beads shimmered beneath the afternoon light, woven carefully into patterns that resembled flowing water. Beside it rested a small carved cedar box. Inside, the silver badge was gone. In its place lay a single eagle feather wrapped together with a strip of soft buckskin. Nothing else. No letter. No explanation. Only one line burned neatly into the inside of the wooden lid. Not in English. Not in Apache. Just simple words that any honest heart could understand. One life remembered. Elias smiled. Not because he had been rewarded. Because promises, once kept, had somehow found their way home. He looked toward the distant mesas. Far away, barely visible against the fading gold of sunset, a lone rider paused atop a ridge. The figure wore buckskin. Long black hair danced gently in the evening wind. Even from that distance, he knew. Ayanna. Neither of them raised a hand. Neither called the other's name. Some friendships became smaller when filled with too many words. She turned her horse first, slowly disappearing beyond the red cliffs where sky and earth became one. Elias remained standing beside the gate until the last trace of dust settled into silence. Ranger stepped beside him, breathing softly against his shoulder. The cowboy rested one weathered hand upon the horse's neck. Then he looked toward the fading light and quietly returned to repairing the broken fence he had left unfinished that morning. Because tomorrow, another traveler would need clean water. Another stranger would need kindness. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the desert would once again decide who crossed its lonely trails. But one thing had changed forever. Out here, justice had not ridden in on gunfire. It had arrived on the back of compassion. And in the end, that was the only victory the West ever truly remembered.